All right, welcome to episode 3 of the Investigative Truth Cold Case Missing. My name is Pat Obashan. I'm a retired police officer, detective from Leominster, Massachusetts, and a private investigator. So in episode 2, I talked a little bit about why cases can end up cold or unresolved. Kind of was all over the place, but within the circle of what I want to talk about, and some of the frustrations professionally and also personally that investigators go through. And I touch base about something very important, which is social media. And, I ask people just to remember, if you're watching this, if you're, looking at a page that, there are family and friends on there, there's really no room for criticism. These pages are made to remember someone and to gather information. So if you have information, please share it. If you don't, don't be a sidewalk investigator. That's just my suggestion. So how did I get involved in Taj Narbonne? Taj Narbonne disappeared March 31st of 1981 from 15 Naples Street in Leominster. He was 9 years old, student at Fallbrook Elementary School on Detico Drive, right off of Union Street, right by the old Holy Family Church. I was a detective for a few years. And in 2002, I've been in the office for a couple of years, and I always looked over at one of the other detectives' desks, and on the floor was a large box. And in that large box was just a bunch of paperwork scattered, I could tell, sticking out. And I watched as that box with this paperwork basically was collecting dust. I know that he had taken a look at whatever that was. I wasn't sure the case that it was at the time, but he had not really touched it in a while. But I wanted to know what it was, and I said, what is that in the box? And he said, it's a missing kid from Naples Street, 1981 case, Taj Narbonne. Now, up until that point, I should say up until me getting on the job in 1988, I had really, I don't want to say I didn't hear of Taj Narbonne. I just don't remember much about that case. It's kind of odd. There's I think, a reason for that. But interestingly enough, I've talked to other people who don't really recall the Narbonne case. And but things were much different back then, and especially when it came to reporting on missing children, no social media, etc. So he said to me, grab it, take a look at it. If you want to take a shot at it, you're welcome to. So I took the box, brought it over to my desk, and over the next couple days, I started picking at all the different reports and things that were in there. And I found out really quickly that it was difficult to comprehend the case. It was difficult to grasp the case as an investigator because everything was out of order in that box. And I found myself picking up, reports from, March, the end of March when he disappeared, 1981. And then I pick up another report from August of 1981. And then I'd be back to April of 1981. So it was jumping all over the place. And it was really, really hard to make sense of everything that had gone on, especially in that first year of his disappearance. So with the assistance of another detective, Rick Gallant, we were moving into a bigger office, thankfully, and he offered to help me sort this case out and put everything in chronological order from, March 31st and going outward. And that's what we began to do. So we got into the new office and started laying out everything. And while we were doing it, we'd be reading a report, and we, pass it to each other if we saw something that was interesting. We were jotting down notes. And almost immediately we realized that there were things that were missing, or it didn't make sense to us. I'm really glad that he assisted me during this portion of the case, or looking at the case, because that second set of eyes was extremely important with items in there that were critical to the future, I believe, of the case. So we got to a point where we had a lot of, really a list of things that we wanted to accomplish, but we realized that it was going to be best for us to start from scratch. I've said this before in, newspaper articles or whatever, that we need to get back to the foundation of Taj, his life and his disappearance. We needed to separate fiction from fact. We needed to really scale that investigation as we were looking at it down. That was the only way we could successfully do that. It wasn't a criticism of what was being done. It was just that it made more sense to do that because we were just seeing things that were missing, or, was this person ever talked to? We don't see it. Was this person ever talked to? We're not seeing it. So, we couldn't continue on until we kind of put things in reverse in order to go forward. We presented our suggestion to reinvestigate was presented to then Chief Peter Roddy. He was great. He listened to everything that we had to say. He listened to the suggestions we had, the concerns we had, and what we wanted to do from there. And one of those was to bring in the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children, Project Alert, which he gave the blessing to all of that. Prior to all of that happening, I realized that I needed to talk to Taj's mom, Annette. She had not really interacted with law enforcement in a while. She was standoffish. There was a reason for that. I didn't know it at the time. I thought that was really odd. But, I understand it more now. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I needed to talk to her. And we didn't have any contact information with her, so I realized that I had to go and speak to her parents, Taj's grandparents, Eunice and Louis Narbonne. So I made a call to the Narbonnes in Fitchburg, and Eunice picked the phone up. Actually, I think Louis was the one who answered the phone and handed me over to his wife. This is where I have some good memories, even though it was a very difficult time for all of us when we got together. I have very good memories, fond memories of them, and they're just wonderful, wonderful people. So she got on the phone. She was very pleasant, and she said, "What can I do for you?" And with a little bit of hesitation, you're a detective and from Leominster. What do you need? And I want to come and talk to you, and I'm hoping that I can talk to your daughter. Well, I'm not sure if that's possible, but you're welcome to come over here and talk to myself and my husband. So I made arrangements to do that, and I showed up at the Narbonne residence in Fitchburg, and I believe that I remember it was either coffee or tea, but I sat down at the table with the coffee or tea that I had, and as soon as I sat down, Eunice sat down, and Louis was already seated, and for the next hour, she lit me up. I've probably never been reamed in my entire life like I have that morning. And I saw every emotion come from that woman, who was simply a loving grandmother who was not happy of what happened and not happy that there were no answers. She swore. She called me names. There's really nothing I was able to do. I felt like I was being scolded by my grandmother. That's how I felt. And and when that happens, you just sit there and you listen. And I listened. When she finished, she reached over, kind of stood up a little bit, reached over the table with her hands and put her hands on my hands and said, "Thank you so much for listening to me. I think I said everything that I need to say to you. And she turned to her husband and she said, Louis, would you like to speak to the detective? And she sat back down, and Louis began right where she ended her rant. That's where he began his conversation with me, and he began his rant toward me in the same manner that she had. And just as quickly as he started, she stopped him and said, do not talk to this nice detective this way. You are to respect him. Don't swear. And she lit him up for a good minute. And he apologized to me. And I didn't want to laugh out loud, but inside I was laughing because she had just done the same to me. And now she was scolding him for doing it. She was protecting me. I laugh at that now, but I understood when I left there that day, I understood a few things. I understood how painful it is for relatives to lose a person and never have an answer. I understood where anger comes from, where anguish comes from, where frustration comes from, where asking questions comes from. Because they explained to me how everything happened in their eyes going back to 1981. They explained to me the frustrations of knowing that something had happened to their grandson, and they did not believe at the time that he ran away. And they wanted to put up missing person flyers right away. They wanted to give a reward right away. And they were told not to. I don't think there is anyone in today's, I don't think you could prevent it anyway, because there's social media, there's so much stuff, but I didn't understand why that was done. And that's documented too. They showed me letters, they showed me things, what not to do. And they were extremely, extremely, extremely frustrated. And that, it never really centered around 15 Naples Street. It went off, and it never centered around the people that they believed it should have centered around. And, I walked out that day understanding exactly maybe why they felt the way they did about law enforcement. And that's not to say that everything was done incorrectly. I'm not saying that at all. They weren't saying that. It was just that, when you have cases and, someone is missing. I mean, for those of you out there who have kids, have you ever lost your kid for 10 minutes in a store and you can't find them? Has your kid ever fallen asleep someplace in the house and you can't find them? Yeah, that's happened to me as a dad, right? And your first instinct is to do everything that you possibly can, and you or you realize how limited you are. You can't just make them appear, but you do what you can do. And that's how they felt. That's how the Narbonne family felt, was that they wanted to do all they could do, and they were told not to. So I walked out of there that day learning a lot. And before I left, Eunice said to me, I hope you're not just another person that's touching base with us and is going to disappear like my grandson did. And I said, no, I don't have any intention on disappearing. Why would you say that? She said, because I'm sick of having introductory meetings with people who never come back, who never return, who we don't hear from, who have given up finding our grandson. And it made me realize, and it's tough. It is. It's tough to think about. It's tough to say, because through the years, my passion for missing kids, my passion for sexual exploitation of kids and what happens, and it's happened here in Massachusetts. I'm going to share a great podcast that's out there. She just got the thing going last year, and she's going to continue talking about Andy Puglisi in Lawrence and what happened to him. And, so I'm going to share that because I want people to start realizing what happened. But I realized that day that, or maybe I didn't realize, but I knew that I would never, ever let them down by not touching base with them. That's, I think, where I was coming from in my mind. And, I couldn't promise that I would find answers. I couldn't do it. But, I did promise that I would not give up on the case, and I would not go away, and I would try my best. And I walked away that day and I said, we can do better. What's wrong with saying that? If there's a cold case out there, if there's an unresolved homicide, if there's anything, right, I think it is, what can we do better? Is there anything that we can do better? Has every stone been unturned? Have we talked to everybody, right? Is this case cold or, right? And for the most part, these cases, right, are looked at and they are gone through. And, I can say that with the Narbonne case. Recently, with that post I put up, right, people are, again, I mentioned this, people are, why don't you talk to this person? Why don't you, do this and do that? It's like, it's 44 years old. 44 years old, and yes, yeah. I'm looking for someone to tell me something that I don't know at this point. Point me in a direction that I'm unfamiliar with. That's what I want. If you have that information, then please send it along. That is where a case continues to move along. It continues to be active. And we can still work on it with the hopes of a resolution. So anyway, I left that day hoping that I would hear from Annette. In the week, the following week, I did. My phone rang and she left a message. I called her back. She was hesitant, but she had received a positive word from her folks that I guess I was okay. So she arranged, had some, phone meetings, some discussions, and she arranged to meet me in person and was very cooperative toward me in that sense that she did not hesitate to come in when she was in town and have discussions with me and answer the questions that I needed to know. And that happened on multiple occasions. And, through the years, I've never not had, I've always been able to call her and have a conversation with her. Some of those conversations are better than others. But that is where we are there. But so that's how I got involved. But the big piece of this was that when the National Center of Missing and Exploited Children came in, they sent 2 incredible investigators that were well-versed in cold cases and looked through the entire file of Taj and determined that, out of, 3 ring binders, there was only really one full 3-ring binder of critical information that we should move forward with. When I say critical information, I mean that, police might have gone to New Hampshire and talked to a kid or looked for a kid that looked like Taj and it didn't turn out that way, or that there was a report from a psychic that, was out in, wherever, talking about water and woods and all of that. I'm not against that either. I'm not. But it has its place, and it's kind of, once you're at a certain point, then you can go there. But again, I factually based, I have water behind me and woods behind me. I mean, you can find that in most places except in the desert. So, but, so they came in, they scaled this investigation down. They told us where we should focus, which was back at 15 Naples Street. They asked us really the same questions that we had about the case as we had gone through it. And that's where we started. The problem is that, we had some pushback, from within, from outside the department as to, why did we need to look at this case? Something, I never understood, other than, people didn't have the confidence that we would find answers, or, but, there was pushback to it. And that's the truth. We had decided not to involve people who had previously touched the case, so we could start from clean slate and build this case up. That was not a slight towards anyone. That was how we conducted the investigation. And we were new, sets of eyes. The National Center of Missing Exploited Children were new sets of eyes. And there have been other people that have come in from outside that have assisted and still assist this case that were a new set of eyes. And, to break that down in that sense, it kind of pushed everything away that wasn't needed anymore and focused us back into that area. So I've always said that, going back to the foundation, building that foundation and then building the house. So going back to 15 Naples and building up the investigation as it should be. Reinvestigating a case is not, again, I say this, is not saying that it was just wrong how it was originally done. We ended up taking some of that initial investigation and bringing it into our new investigation because obviously it belonged there. There's some facts to the case that stand out and will always stand out. One of those facts is, for instance, that we're not going to dismiss the original police report, right? Taj was reported missing in the morning of March 31st, 1981. The first police report was taken at 5 o'clock that afternoon. I know, you probably just yelled at the screen, but that was protocol. That was how reported missing children were dealt with then, right? We've heard that you had to wait 24 hours and you had to, right, a lot of times that missing person, right, would come back. We don't do that in today's world. We would jump all over it and start calling the houses of friends or knocking on doors, posting a picture on social media, and doing it that way. That's how we do it because we realize that there is a legitimate threat out there that this person is not, safe. Okay, so, that's something that, right, you look at and you're like, okay, that goes into that one main binder. We're not going to dismiss that. The fact that, areas were manually searched, you wouldn't dismiss that. That's extremely important as well. To the point where during the, reinvestigation, I touched base with many people who did those initial searches. And based on that, you learn new information, okay? Kind of off the path here with that, but just because an area has been manually searched by people does not always rule that area out for future searches. That has happened, as well. I know I'm kind of moving on a little fast. I'm going to bring it back, but where people have said that area was always already searched. Why are you there? Well, because it was searched manually, right? And if we're looking for, if that area was searched looking for a kid who ran away and that was living in the woods, that's a lot different than, searching an area for a person who, right, may have been dead and left out there. I know that's raw to hear. That's the honesty of investigations, right? So you have two different situations or two different scenarios to go on. So just because an area has been searched does not mean that we're going to go back and not, or we're not going to go back and research that area. But the pushback that we got, I questioned, but it didn't stump us from doing what we wanted to do. We knew enough about the case where we needed to make progress in certain areas, talk to people. I will talk about that in upcoming episodes. But, we knew that we were going to be doing things that other investigators had never done. And I think people like to come back in to something when it reactivates, right? When there's things going on in it. We just felt at that time that we did not want to go there, and we didn't go there, and we never went there. So just a little on that. So, unscripted, I don't have any notes around me. I'm not in a shirt and tie. I'm outside, it's cold, and just talking about this as I wish. I don't have a backdrop behind me, a desk in front of me. I welcome your questions. I welcome your comments. In the future, I'll be looking at different cases. A lot I'm familiar with. If you think that, or you want to ask me a question on a case that's going on, I will answer that as best that I can, either quickly in an episode now or in a future episode. And that is it for episode 3. All right. So in the next episode, I'm going to talk about Taj Narbonne. And I want to talk a little bit about what I learned about Taj from his family, from his friends, his situation leading up to his disappearance, what happened around then, and into the morning after, and what happened, and then we'll kind of go from there. So thank you for joining me. Hit the like, hit the subscribe. I appreciate the support on this, and hopefully you enjoy the format. But I will see you in the next episode.